In order to fully convince you about the unity of this fascial net, I want to take you on a brief journey through the embryology of how the net comes to be. If we look at the fertilized ovum, the first single cell, it's kind of like a water balloon. In fact, the whole structure of human beings could be seen as a series of about 1 trillion water balloons with the membranes pulling in like the skin of a balloon and the structure in the cell pushing out. That's kind of what we're doing with the myofascial meridians, isn't it? The bones are pushing out and myofascia is pulling in. Anyway, going back to this fertilized cell, which is a huge cell, if you took a pencil and sharpened it and just dropped it very lightly on a piece of paper, that's how big an ovum is, and that's absolutely huge for a human cell. Anyway, as it gets graduates from the ovary and goes into the fallopian tube, it's covered by a jelly-like coating called the zona pellucida, which keeps it, acts as the membrane when the cell divides, because this cell is going to divide into 2 cells, yeah? And as it divides into 2 cells, you see a little bit of fluid around between the cells and the zona pellucida, and that's the fluid matrix in which the rest of the cells will live and have their being. But the zona pellucida is really providing the structure at this point. But you get to 4 cells, 8 cells, in fact you get to a whole sphere of cells as it goes further down the fallopian tube and into the uterus, and you still have the zona pellucida around it, but somewhere around day 10, the zona pellucida begins to disintegrate and go off. And what you end up with is these cells expand into a blastosphere, which is a sphere of cells. Now, I can't do a sphere here on the thing, but essentially, we had a water balloon of the individual cells. Now we have a water balloon of a whole bunch of cells. This is called the blastosphere. And this is much bigger than the original bunches of cells within the zona pellucida. And what happens with this blastosphere of cells is that it begins to, these cells on the edge kind of put out pseudopods, and they pull themselves in to create a kind of I don't know, a donut or something. So these cells are putting out pseudopods and pulling from the inside, and it begins to make a dent in this blastosphere and pulls it closer and closer and closer to the other end. So you're almost making a donut or something, but it goes all the way through to where it touches the other side. What you end up with is a balloon like this. I get my best stuff at a toy store. This balloon has a hole all the way through the middle. And that's essentially what we are, is a hot dog with a hole through the middle, or an elongated bagel. This ends up being our digestive tract. So we are kind of a water balloon with a hole through the middle, from mouth to anus. And so what you're seeing here is that these cells invaginate in here until we get a kind of cup-shaped thing, like that. And then finally, these break through to the other side, and you end up with what I was just showing you, this kind of torus-shaped thing with a hole through the middle. Yeah? And what ends up happening here is that we get a triple layer arrangement. A layer on the top, a layer in the middle, and a layer on the bottom. And these are called, they're obviously touching each other, these are called the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm. Now, at this point, these cells are beginning to specialize. The ectoderm will end up forming our skin and our brain and our nervous system and other stuff, and the mesoderm will form our muscles and connective tissues, and the endoderm will form the epithelial lining of things, like the lining of the digestive tract. But my point at the moment is that as soon as you have these three layers, I've put them apart here just so you can see the three layers, but they of course would be touching each other. And what you're looking at, if you're looking at the organism this way, is a cut through the organism in a transverse section. So at this point, when you have specialized cells, ectodermal, mesodermal, and endodermal cells, suddenly at this point, it makes a difference what the spatial relationships are among the cells. It really didn't make much difference here what the relationships are with the cells, because they're all the same. They're all carbon copies of each other. But now, when you start getting specialized, and from here on in, they're just going to get more and more specialized. They're all the specialized different kinds of muscle cells, cardiac and skeletal and smooth and slow twitch and fast twitch, and all the different kinds of nerves and all the different kinds of connective tissues and epithelial cells. It's just going to get more and more specialized, and the spatial arrangement is going to get more and more important. So here you have in the middle of the mesoderm, you get this kind of thickening, which is going to end up being our backbone, and on either side of it you have a piece called the mesenchyme, which suddenly migrates out and puts cells all through all three layers. Again, all three layers would be pretty much together. Okay? And these cells start to secrete little fibers outside the cells. These fibers are called reticular fibers because they're made out of a protein called reticulin. But later, all of this fibrous material of reticulin will be replaced by collagen, and that is the collagen net that we're working with in myofascial work. So it's really common for us to say to divide anatomy up. We're back to this parts and wholes thing. We divide anatomy up into the plantar fascia and the central tendon of the diaphragm and the thoracicolumbar fascia and the Achilles tendon, etc. But what we're looking at here is something that is, in fact, in reality, unitary. Unitary from top to toe and from birth to death. This net is what we're looking at. When we look at the myofascial meridians, we are looking at particular meridians that go through this net. I'd like to just complete this for a minute by looking at what happens to these three layers. You have the mesoderm here, and it's kind of like the tuna fish in the middle of an overstuffed sandwich. It starts bulging and falling out of the sides like this. This is how the cells begin to grow. And the endodermal cells are bent by this growth into something like this. And the ectodermal cells are also bent something like this by the growth of the mesoderm. And the mesoderm continues to grow out and around and out and around until it comes and joins in the front of the organism. And the mesoderm also continues to grow out and around the ectoderm, but the ectoderm is a little smarter than the endoderm. It has this little piece that's coming out like that. So whereas, just to carry this over a little farther, whereas the mesoderm comes around here and completely surrounds the endoderm into a tube. That, by the way, is your gut tube. It goes from your mouth all the way down to your anus. The mesoderm comes around here and pinches off a piece of the ectoderm here, so that what you end up with is two pieces of ectoderm outside and pinched off inside a tube. And this, except in cases of spina bifida, comes together and joins back here and provides the muscles of the back and the back of the backbone. The superficial part of the ectoderm comes around here and forms the skin. So here what you see is the general vertebrate body plan. and how this comes out of the endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm. The mesodermal structures, which form all the myofasciae, are in the middle, spreading out around the two organic structures. Now, I've made them both tubes. This one is obvious that it's a tube. It starts at your mouth and comes out at the anus, and that's the digestive tube. It's got the liver and the pancreas and all the other organs that go along with it. This tube is your brain and your spinal cord. It may not be so obvious that it's a tube, but the tube is open in the ventricles of the brain and open in the spinal canal all the way down. And you've heard it said that the skin is the outer surface of the brain, and you can see how true this is. The nerves grow from the brain out through the muscles and the bones to the skin. So the skin and the brain are the same stuff. Just one is the outer surface of the other. So what we're going to be looking at here is how the mesodermal structure holds this together. You can still see this basic plan, anatomical plan, in our body today. If you understand, of course, that you're looking at the body this way, then you can see that this central piece right here corresponds to the center of the two circles there. And growing out from it, the mesoderm grows out around until it meets in the front, and when it does so, it surrounds all the organs, the heart and the lungs up here, and the esophagus, and all the digestive organs, the liver and the pancreas, etc., and the sexual organs down here, in one big ventral cavity. It's called the ventral cavity here. It involves the thorax and the abdomen and the pelvis. Similarly, in the back, the mesoderm is from the central backbone, growing out around the muscles and the bones here, forming the neural arch and forming the skull, the neurocranium, and protecting the central nervous system, the organic material of the nerves back here. So that what you have is this is a dorsal cavity back here. So that original fascial net that we saw that appears around day 14 is also still here. It surrounds every organ with a bag. There's fascia through every organ. Those bags are attached to the spine here. The brain and spinal cord are surrounded by fascia in the form of the pia mater and the dura mater, the meninges, and those are attached to the skull and the sacrum and along the spine. And the whole net is still there, except for, say, the open lumens of the blood vessels and the alimentary canal. And you can fray this net with age, you can slice it with the surgeon's knife, or you can tear it through injury, but the fascial net remains unitary from the birth to death and from top to toe. So even though we need to learn anatomy in terms of parts, and Lord knows you do need to know the parts, we tend to think about it as separate parts, like the Achilles tendon, the plantar fascia, the central tendon of the diaphragm. It's good to remember, thinking back on this embryology, it's good to remember that the reality is the unity of the net. The parts are just human-made inventions for analyzing it, for convenience. But the actual reality is the unity of the net. Now let's go look and see how this fascial net actually looks.